classmates. I am Rivan Abigor, base BA2, batch 5. Now, I am given a task to report lesson 5, 19th century in the Philippines. Okay. Learning objectives are discuss important changes in Spain and in the Philippines. Second, enumerate the policies that enable Filipinos to organize and ask for reforms. And last is relate how condition of the 19th century and Europe affected the formation of resource consciousness. The late 18th and early 19th century marked the beginning of the Industrial Revolution led by the British. No? Other countries were quick to emulate British industrialization. Spain lagged behind its neighbor mainly because of its engagement with the Napoleonic and Carlist wars in the internal power struggle. These changes in Spain eventually affected its relation toward its colonies, and the Philippines experienced liberal policies and the reform for the first time. So in 19th century, Philippines started to get influence from the Spain. So, exploration. Mapping Rizal's struggle. Rizal dedicated his most life to works to the Philippines. However, his life can also be characterized by his travels to different parts of the world. He traveled as a student, and his travels were important since he was exposed to the different cultures and political contexts. So Jose Rizal is one person who contributed most in the Philippines. No? His life is most dedicated to the work of the Philippines and to study the culture of the Philippines. Next is economic and political situation of the Philippines. Some of the more notable reforms were the abolition of the galleon trade and the opening of the Philippines to the trade in 1830. The end of Spain's war was Dutch and the British, as well as the nullification of the slave raiding activities of the Moro, also led to the development of the agricultural land and discovery of the new frontiers in the Philippines. This eventually created and changed in the social and economic class in the country with principales and mestizos, local elites. From Laguna, Rizal family was considered to be one of the local elites in the province since they were leasing large blocks of lands from the friar estates in Calamba. So, the life of Jose Rizal, as we read a while ago, his family is considered one of the elites or local elites of that time, way back 19th century. The implementation of Gadi's Constitution in 1812, a brief legal justification for the quest for equality since it was started in the documents that all citizens of Spain, including those in the colonies, were equal under the Cadiz Constitution in 1812 is created to have the equality in Spain and all people in Spain, so to avoid bias. Okay, next. Education and the rise of the Ilustrados. But through all these reforms, perhaps the most notable was the increase of educated Filipinos as the colonial government, under directives from Spain, also started to reform educational institution in the Philippines. So, Spain contributed a lot in the Philippines classmates. So, traveling to Europe during that time was also made easier with the opening of the Suez Canal in 1855, with their education and exposure outside the country. These individuals, who later on were referred to as Ilustrados, eventually formed the core of new emerging movement that asked the colonial government for much needed reform in the Philippines. This movement also drew inspiration from the earlier efforts of the native secular priests such as Padre Jose Vargas, who fought for equal rights among the 1860s. So, secular priests moved along with students' involvement from different higher institutions in the country during that time. To gain equal rights, however, was interpreted by the Spanish administrator and priors as an attempt to overthrow the government, leading to massive breakdown made against students along with local elites in the country in 1872. Burgos, along with Father Jacinto Zamora and Mariano Gomez, were executed and on February 17, 1872. So that Padre Jose Burgos and Zamora and Gomez are the fought for the equality of all people or all involved people, but Spaniards kind of misinterpreted them. They thought that the three of them were overthrew the government, leading masses to break made against students along with some local elites in the country. So, Rizal was born in 1861 amidst of these political and economic reforms and turmoils. He belonged to a local elite family who was fortunate enough to capitalize on existing conditions at that time. No. He was sent to school in the Philippines, and despite the hardship of that his family had to go through during the latter part of the century, he was able to study in Europe. So Jose Rizal was made amidst of those trials they encountered during the Spaniards, during the 19th century in the Philippines. Rizal belonged to a local elite in the family at that time, and also, though they experienced hard time, his family managed to send Jose Rizal to school, including in schools in Europe. Rizal actively participated in propaganda movement while he was studying in Europe. Later on, he moved back to Philippines in 1892, establishing the La Liga Filipina. After Jose Rizal studying outside the country, Europe or other schools, he back to the Philippines. As what I have said, Rizal go back here in the Philippines to create an organization which is the La Liga Filipina. Rizal involvement in the revolution is still a controversial issue among historians today. Yes, we all know that. With some arguing that Rizal was not in favor of the revolution, while others say Rizal being one of the main influences of the 1880s. Two things are for sure, however. First is that Rizal also thought about revolution as a means of emancipating the Philippines from Spain, based on the letters to fellow propagandists and friends such as Jose Alejandrino, Antonio Luna, Marcelo H. del Pilar, and Ferdinand Blumentritt. Second is that the founders of Katipunan, like Andres Bonifacio and Redato Arellano, were members of Rizal's La Liga Filipina. So indeed, Rizal has an influence in the KKK, since the founder of KKK was a member of the Liga Filipina organization. So this 19th century is also focused how Rizal made a big contribution in the Philippines in the late 19th century in the Philippines. So that's all. Thank you and God bless you.